What's up, gangsters? It's been a while since I've done any kind of a how-to video, but I've been working on getting finished up with my Edward/Hasegawa P40, and I've been doing quite a bit of work on it with acrylic inks, and I've had several requests to do a little bit of a explanation of how I'm working with those. And specifically what I'm talking about are these liquitex acrylic inks. I've been using them a lot. They are wonderful. And so I think this will be pretty good. Let's check it out. Okay, so first things first, let me show you what I've been doing with these inks. And then I'll give a little bit of a demonstration on how I'm doing those things. I got a little bit of tape here because I was spraying some dull coat just a little bit ago, so let me get that out of the way. But basically, this is all weathering stuff in this case. Dirt, exhaust stains, that sort of thing. And acrylic inks are a slightly different approach from the usual suspects, which typically are going to be oils. Now, I have not moved away from oils. Oils are wonderful. I still love the way that they do their thing, and I plan to continue to use oils. But there are places where oils leave a little bit to be desired. One of the main things is drying time. You know, sometimes you got to wait for a day or two before they're really fully cured out. And acrylics, you know, they dry almost instantly, so that's an advantage. That also can be a disadvantage. The other thing is that oils, if you want to spray something, oils are really not the best strategy. So, for example, I wanted to cover a large portion of the bottom of this thing with dirt. You can see pretty much from the wheel wells all the way to the tail that I've got quite a bit of dirt on there. And not only did I want to apply it in a relatively dense fashion to sort of illustrate some splatter and collection, but I wanted to fade it out towards the edges to just kind of give some discoloration of accumulated grime. And so you can see out here, it's just a really, really thin, almost invisible film. And oils just are not the best for that. In fact, I hope that it's going to show up on camera. There you can kind of see it. Actually comes clear out here by the aileron. And oils, you know, you can spray them, but obviously you got to thin them a whole bunch. And it's just not really the easiest or the most effective thing to do. Also, with things like these powder stains, powder burns, whatever you want to call them, you know, smut streaking out from these ejector ports. Again, I want to spray those, so oil's not the best option. I could spray those with super, super thin paint, but not only is that a little bit problematic because with paints, they tend to be very permanent. You know, if you're using enamels, yeah, you can potentially wipe those off with mineral spirits. If you're using acrylics, though, in general, not as easy to remove, although I'm going to show you a trick because I know you're immediately going, but wait, why would acrylic ink be any easier? Just stand by, I'll explain that. I've done a lot of spray staining with lacquers, and that can work, and there are situations where if you really get into trouble, you can remove it. But again, it's just not as easy as you'd like for it to be in a very high penalty situation like you're going to have with an exhaust stain. Because I mean, that is right there in your face, and you know you want it to be nice. And if it fails, because it is a difficult thing to do well, to spray the shape, you know, get all that in there. You know, you might have to redo it a time or two, and so you want something that gives you a do-over button, and these acrylic inks offer more of that than anything other than oils. But again, because I'm not going to spray oils, I wanted something different. So That's the kind of thing I'm going to be talking about. So let's talk about the materials themselves for a second. And then I'll get into showing you exactly how I'm doing those things. So I started checking these out last year because I had used like Winsor & Newton Indian ink as a component of washes in the past. And you know, so a wash that's made with an acrylic ink and mixed with like IPA has some really weird and wonderful properties that I liked, but just not something that I used very often. I've also used inks when blended with a clear gloss varnish, or really even a clear matte varnish, but it's got to be an acrylic, so like Aqua Gloss or AK Ultra Matte, and a little bit of flow enhancer and a little bit of ink to produce what people call magic wash, which is also a really cool thing. That is kind of a substitute for your traditional enamel or oil panel line or detail washes. So I'd been using inks for those kind of things for a while, but I didn't really get interested in trying to learn more about them until last year. Ammo started advertising their shaders, and based on their properties, I started to wonder because I watch like figure painting videos, and the figure painting guys are the ones who use these inks the most. So it made me wonder if those ammo shaders were really just nothing more than acrylic ink. So I bought some, started tinkering with them, and that does seem to sort of be the consensus. But regardless of whether these are the same as the ammo shaders or not, these are fantastic. I'm going to end up sounding like a total cult evangelist before this video is over because I love them so much. Every time I use these, I feel like I'm cheating. And I think you'll see why after I do a little bit of demonstration here. So what I've got for a demo piece is just this little mule wing that I've been doing other things with, and it should be just fine for this. So all that's got on it is some Mr. Surfacer 1500 right now. And I've got the same inks that I was using on the 40 still mixed up right here, so be able to see those. And what I've specifically been mixing these with, I mentioned IPA, and IPA works pretty good with most of these Liquitex inks. I can't speak to any of the other brands, and I can only assume that acrylic inks are just like acrylic paint in that they're just like sausage. They, look like they're the same from the outside, but you never know what's in the middle. And that's one of the hassles of anything that's called acrylic. Your mileage may vary if you use a different brand of acrylic ink, but for these Liquitex, what I have found is that while pure IPA works fine for some colors like burnt umber or black, it's a total fail with the white. When you blend this with IPA, it turns into a cup full of little tiny chunks or flecks of white ink. Not good at all. And so just through doing some experimentation, I discovered that X20A is the perfect universal thinner for these inks. And I know somebody's going to say, oh, but X20A is just IPA. No, it's not. X20A is a blend of 54% water and 46% other stuff. The other stuff being a couple of different kinds of alcohol for the most part, and then some super secret additives. Regardless, for whatever reason, and there's a bunch of different kinds of alcohols, and they will affect the resins that are in these acrylics differently. This is the ticket right here. Blends up smooth like butter. Melted butter, I guess, to be exact. So anyway, what I've got here is a couple of different mixtures, because I was doing different things. These specifically I've got, because I needed a very dark brownish black. You can see that. How that, whoops, yeah, that's great. Hey, not a big deal, because it's just it's just an acrylic ink. I can clean that up easy. Anyway, that's a very dark brown, almost black. And that's a mixture of the carbon black, and I'll leave that there because I'm going to demonstrate how to clean that up here in just a little bit. Anyway, what I wanted was a carbon black for the base of this exhaust stain. Because with Allied aircraft, what you typically see will be that it'll have that sort of carbon, dark brown base to it. And then it'll have a lighter tone on top of it, which will be like a really light tan or a kind of a tannish gray. And that's because of the tetraethyl lead that was in the fuel to raise the octane. And it created that particular light colored ash. So I'm basically going for a multi-layered effect on this exhaust stain. And so what my ultimate intent here is that after laying down that sort of carbon base and then using this to kind of produce a bit of a mid-tone, I've locked all of that in with some MRP super matte clear, sprayed really thin in just that area to just basically lock that in and make it bulletproof. Because I'm going to come back and I'm going to use oils for my third layer on this, and I'm also going to use oils underneath here to work on this dirt. I'm going to do some speckling, and I'm going to do some streaking in this area. So first thing I'm going to show you then is how I did this sort of blotchy dirt effect that you see there. And it takes me longer to say it than it does to show it, because it is so ridiculously simple. So what I've got here is the ink and a little bit of packing sponge and a paper towel. And so all I'm going to do is take some ink there. I'm going to wick most of it out onto this paper towel, and then I'm going to just start working on the surface. And you can see immediately that, with the sponge, you get this kind of random effect. But here you have to watch. I'll try to keep this all on camera. Notice what happens, that as this stuff is drying very quickly, but where it's not drying as quickly, you can see that it coalesces kind of on its own, and it does it in a really kind of a different way than what you would get with something that was mineral spirits based. See how it's dry already, and see how it's made these kind of almost chip-like shapes. So that's kind of the magic. See where it's coalesced there, but it's still kind of the surface tension effect kind of gives it those sort of jagged edges. So there already you've got a pretty neat effect. And how much of that you get depends on how loaded the sponge is. So if I just take the sponge and I just go full density, see, I just get that. That's not interesting. That's why I'm wicking most of it out. But you can then take that and start to do these things with it, and so you're going to get a different effect. Now it also matters a lot. Got a hair in there, that's not good. My sponges seem to be magnets for hair. So anyway, you just kind of keep working that, and as you keep working it, the speckles get smaller, so that you can kind of get that diffusion out to the edges, which is pretty common with patterns like this. So we'll just leave that there and then watch how this dries while I show you something else. So let's take just a little bit of this ink, and let me add some more IPA to that, and I'm going to add a lot. And the point here is to show you that you can really do a lot just by changing the viscosity, the mixture. All right, so there we go. There's a bunch of IPA. That's probably what, like 5-to-1 or something there. And that's pretty typical of the ratios that I work with. I mean, 5-to-1, 10-to-1, 20-to-1, not at all uncommon. So let me stir that up. Okay, and now, and again, I'm wicking most of that out. I'll go over here, and it looks like it's the same, but it's not. You'll see what I mean as it dries. The more reducer you have in there, the more it tends to do this kind of coalescing effect. And you can kind of see what I'm talking about, where I'll dab and it'll collect in the middle, and then you watch how it I don't know any other way to say it than coalescing. But you can see what I mean about these sort of chip-like shapes. Because of the IPA, I guess, biting into the surface a little bit, it tends to just stick at a certain point and set with these little shapes. And that's why I think it's pretty authentic for the type of effects that I would be using it for, like, dirt and mud spatter. You can kind of see what's happening over here now that it's beginning to dry, how much, like when you first put it on, you're kind of like, whoa, because it's kind of extreme. It seems really thick and opaque. But you can see as it starts to dry very quickly, it turns into that film. And that is exactly what dirt residue on a vehicle looks like after, you've got mud and dust, and then it gets rained on and washed off, but it leaves that film. And that's a very good approximation of that. So we'll just kind of leave that there for a second to kind of do its thing. But here's another example of it. All right, this drop tank for the 40. You can see on the bottom what I've got going on here. I'm going to give you a really good close look at it. Look at the tonal variety that I've got there, and that's strictly by just changing the viscosity on the fly, and then also the blend by just adding, a little bit more of a lighter or darker shade to the mix that I'm using. So it's just, it's super easy to work with that way. I could now take this blend that I've got. I can come over here and let me get a little thing here to do some mixing in. I could put a little bit of this here and come along with a little bit of the dark brown stuff, and we'll get a sort of a mid-tone going. See, just like that. You got complete creative freedom to do pretty much whatever you want. And then I'm going to get rid of most of that on the paper towel, and then come back in and work on top of this. Now, here's where a note of caution is in order, okay? Because of the IPA, it will reactivate whatever is already there. And that can get to be a real pain in the ass. You have to be super careful and have a really light touch to keep that from happening. And even then, it's difficult to prevent completely. And what will happen is that it'll get so soft, so open, that as you're trying to dab the new tone on top of the old tone, you'll actually just blow away whatever the first layer was and go right back down to the paint. And you can kind of end up chasing your tail like that. So it's I guess you could say that that's a disadvantage, because like with oils, if you give them enough time to dry, you can put oils on oils as long as they're cured without having to deal with too much of that. So you know, I suppose you could say that's a disadvantage, but you can also just lock it in if it's really causing you a problem, and you know, use, like I do, use some lacquer flat to make sure that it's you know, not going to be movable with the next layers that you put on. So anyway, that's the basic sort of dirt technique. Now, speckling, that's also a great thing when you're doing dirt, and I'll demonstrate that, and that'll also show you why I don't do much speckling with this stuff. I'm sure if you've worked with oil washes or enamel washes and done speckling, you've noticed that one of the great things about that technique is that when the speckles land, they sort of have a tendency to wick out and give you these really neat random shapes that are not round. Unfortunately, this is the one weakness with this stuff. Okay, you can see, all right, I'm doing this here, and you can see that once that it has a tendency to land round and stay round, which sometimes is fine, you know, that happens. But if you don't want that, then this may not be the best material. See, that's what I'm talking about. Little round speckles, they're there, they're stuck, and they don't really move and flow at all to give you any other shape than that. So this is something to be aware of. All right, so that's that. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Now let's talk about spraying it a little bit. But this is in my way. Oh no, what am I going to do? Because this is all mostly dried, right? Well, here is the trick. And this is the thing that has kept most users, I think, from not wanting to do this kind of stuff with anything that's called an acrylic. Because, you know, as we know, acrylics, just like I've showed you here, they dry pretty quickly, and then they don't want to shift the way that enamels and oils do. I mean, you know, for a day or so after you put an enamel or an oil effect in place, you can move it around with mineral spirits, no problem. You can completely remove it if you need to. And so you kind of have this penalty-free application method that's great. And people shy away from using acrylics for that reason, and that's a very good reason. But I sort of accidentally discovered a hack last year, maybe a year before. And that's this stuff right here. What had happened was it was on a 1/32 Spitfire that I was doing at the time that had invasion stripes. And I had, and as usual, all of my paint work was MRP, so pure lacquer. But the invasion stripes were were actually Mission Models paint, MMP. So I had my gray and green lacquer, and then I had my black and white acrylic on top of that. And I had sprayed that Mission Models, or not sprayed, sorry, because I did those invasion stripes. They were hand brushed to look, you know, like they were done with a mop, right? And I did not use the poly. And, you know, Mission Models paint, when you don't use the poly, is a little more susceptible to being washed off. And I had decided to give the thing a good degreasing before I put my clear coat over all of that, because I had been finger fucking the thing for months, and I just wanted to make sure I didn't have any Cheeto dust on it. So I grabbed my 409, and 409 is a household cleaner that was introduced back in the 60s, and I've used it for decades because not only is it good in the house, but it's a great all-purpose cleaner in the shop. Like, it has a mild degreasing effect, so like I have scrubbed off more motorcycle parts than I can count with this stuff. It's just great. So I keep some around, and I thought, well, I need to degrease this piece, but I need something that's not going to screw up any of the materials that are in place, And so I thought, oh, well, I'll just use 409 because, you know, its paint isn't going to be harmed, but, you know, my nasty finger oils will get removed immediately. Well, when I was working on it, I started noticing that some of that Mission Models paint was coming off on my little paper towel. And I'm like, wait a minute, what the heck? That's not supposed to happen. So I started doing some experimenting, and I discovered that some acrylics, again, going back to that fact that seems like no two brands of acrylic are the same, some acrylics are easily removed with 409. And I think that 409's active ingredient is ammonium chloride. It's got like 0.5% in there. And I can only think that that's what does it because, you know, as most of us know, ammonia is a solvent for the types of resins that are typically used in what we call acrylics. So it makes good sense. The bad news is that this stuff, as far as I know, is not available anywhere else besides the United States. So you guys across the pond, you may want to do some searching for something else that's got that ammonium chloride, see if it works. There may be other cleaners that will do the same job, and I would encourage you to experiment. You can get some of this off with just pure water, but let me show you the difference. So this is just straight tap water right here. All right, and let me get a paper towel. Okay, and so there where I spilled that, you can see I'm scrubbing at it with the water. Nah, nothing happening. Not going anywhere, right? Okay, all those speckles from where I was speckling, not going anywhere with the water. All right, same thing here. Okay, scrubbing on it with the water, not really going anyplace. Okay, now watch this. This is greatness. This is like super cheating. Okay, I'll just put some 409 right there on that, put some on my towel right here, and here we go. Yep, insta gone. Just like that, and smells wonderful too. Smells so fresh and clean and spring-like. So, got that off of there. What about this? Hopefully I'm not about to get proven wrong. Having to scrub just a little bit. You know, some of it depends on how much it's bitten into the substrate. And over here, you know, it was not as thick of a mixture. It was just more IPA. But there you go. Just like that. Gone. And none of the Mr. Surfacer 1500 on my paper towel. Just nothing but acrylic. I mean, yeah, it's still there in the rivets and panel lines, but that's just unavoidable. So, there you go. And this is great because, all right, the other thing that I've been doing with these acrylic inks is I've been using them in some of my figure painting exercises where, you know, because I'm trying to learn to be a better figure painter. And one of the reasons that I suck at figure painting is just because I'm just not good at painting. You know, things like eyeballs, we all dread that, and you're going to make mistakes. And on my last figure painting exercise, I used these acrylic inks to do the eyeballs, and I was able to paint them pretty much at full density. I will put them on a wet palette, and I will introduce a little bit of water if I need it to get it a little bit thinner. But I'm painting it with things like, you know, like these Winsor & Newton Miniature Series 7 brushes. And I'm able to work with it just on the very tip of the brush, which is one of the things that I love about oils. You know, with traditional acrylic painting, I think most of these guys who are good at it will tell you that what they're trying to do is load the belly of the brush and get enough material in there so that it flows, and you know, also because they're working with glazes, They also, tend to fill up the entire belly of the brush. But that's completely the opposite of how I think most people work, at least on small detail stuff, with oils, where you really just, oils are so dense that really you just need a little speck of paint right on the very tip of the brush. So what I'm trying to explain here is that these inks, for whatever reason, seem to sort of operate somewhere in between acrylic paint and the way that oils work. And I can't even explain that. But when I dip the tip of the brush in here, it's not immediately just filling up all the bristles. And now I've got just a little bit, and now I can paint. It's pretty hard to see. I can paint with a lot of control and do little tiny things without having, without having it go all over the place. I don't know. That's just something that when it comes to brush painting acrylics that I have always struggled with, was getting the right amount of whatever thinner, water, alcohol, whatever is being used in there, and getting the paint in the right place. And then, the fact that it fills up the whole brush, and I get more paint coming out onto the thing. So like if I'm trying to paint something tiny like an eyeball, it just ends up being a mess. And this solved that for me. And I don't know really any other way to explain it than this, and to just demonstrate that. And again, it feels to me almost like a cheat, because I was, with those eyeballs on that bust that I'm talking about, I was able to do a pretty good job of painting the eyeballs exactly the way that I wanted them right out of the gate. But here's the next hack, okay? Certainly I didn't get it perfect. So what I found is that I could then take and use another brush and keep a little bit of 409 right there. And then I could start to use it in the same way that I would use mineral spirits and oils. And hopefully you'll be able to see this if we can get in close enough. I'm able to use it in the same way that you use mineral spirits with oils as a kind of a correction fluid, so that you can come back and cut in and refine your shapes. So if your eyeball is not perfectly round, you can get it there by removing material. See how I did that? Again, I feel like it's cheating. And because the 409 is benign, even if I had a layer of acrylic underneath this, as long as it's fully cured and it's much thicker than this ink that I'm working with, you could probably get away with doing that too. But since I'm typically working on top of lacquer, it's definitely a zero penalty thing. Like I have just purposely experimented where I've taken 409 on a rag and just scrubbed as hard as I could on lacquer, and yeah, nothing. Maybe just the barest trace of paint coming off. So it's good. All right, so there you go. That's two different things there. So. Or three maybe. So we got the sponge work, and that tends to be what I do most of it with, is a sponge, because that's just the type of effect that I'm typically going to use it for. But I told you up front that I wanted to spray at least the base of those exhaust stains. So, got to show you that. I just got to get my airbrush hose stretched out here. All right, so what I've got here is my frankenbrush, which is my new favorite thing. This is, I made a video about this. This is my PS, my Procon Boy PS275 that has a PS267 air cap and nozzle and crown cap on it, and an Iwata HPB 0.2 millimeter needle in it. This thing, yeah, this, I gave away my Sotar. Sorry, Gil, I know you gave that thing to me years ago, Gil Mondragon, and I loved that Sotar, but this gives me trigger control that I did not have with the Sotar. So trust me, I passed it on to Justin Lentz. He's an awesome dude and he'll make good use of it, better use than I was. So I've got this thing now turned down to about, let's see, it's about 10 PSI. This ink that I just poured in here, that's probably thinned like 5 to 1. But again, you know, you just have to experiment with ratios just like any other paint to get what you want. So let's see what happens here. We'll just spray some. So immediately I hit the trigger too hard, and you can see, you know, it'll do what any paint will do. It'll immediately spider, and obviously you don't want that. You know, you can chase it around there, kind of do some cool things with that maybe. Who knows if you're, you know, trying to create some streaks. But that's not what we're about. We are about trying to, let's pretend that this is an exhaust stain that runs off like this. And you can see that it is really pretty docile and easy to control as long as you know, you're light on the trigger. The X20A, and this is why, you know, some people really like to spray, like even their, you know, like their Tamiya, their Mr. Hobby, whatever the case may be, they actually prefer X20A because it does dry pretty fast like this. You know, when I was using Tamiya, I was always thinning it with Mr. Leveling Thinner, and that works great, but it does not set quite as quickly as it does with IPA or other alcohol blends like X20A. So, you know, there we go. I mean, that's, you know, and you can pull out wide, you can do, I can use the Mac valve. Let's see what happens here when I do that. So let's just take the Mac valve and crank it mostly shut. I've got this Grex Mac valve that I really like because being here on the hose and having a large knob makes it relatively easy to manipulate. And if your airbrush didn't come with one, yep, see, there we go. Look at that. So depending on how you set the Mac valve, you know, you can get different sizes of speckles. You really need more pressure when you're doing the speckling technique because you got to have enough. Material coming out, and so I typically will speckle at more like 15 or 20 psi. But you can kind of hear it sounds almost like sizzling, and you can see again where you get that really nice sort of speckled look. And I could come in with some different tones right on top of that, and because I'm spraying, you know, they'll get traction, and you can get a blend of things going on there. So, you know, it's like any kind of paint in that you can really do whatever you want to creatively by changing the viscosity and the tones, and it's fun because you can do that on the fly. But what you have with this stuff that you don't have with other materials is that combination of being very quick to dry so that you can instantly see, you know, what it looks like, and the total confidence that if it does not look like what you want it to, you can just wash it right off. Just like that. And this has been a huge thing for me because, like, when I did the dirt on the bottom of the 40, I was chasing a tone. And what I mean by that is that I had an idea of the color tone that I wanted for this dirt, but I just wasn't there. And so I started blending and adding more, and I was chasing it, and I was getting to that point where I was just blowing, you know, I had a huge, what I felt like anyway, was a huge buildup of material. I was losing all of the gray underneath because it was getting too thick, and it was getting uncooperative in places where I would try to work it and it would blow right through to the paint. It just wasn't good. And after about 3 or 4 hours of that, I was like, yeah, this is stupid. I got out the 409 and I washed off the whole bottom of the plane in about 5 minutes, and there was barely a trace, like I said, just in the panel lines and the rivets of the ink that I had used. Got on Amazon, ordered up the raw umber, burnt umber, and then when that came in, I went back at it again, and I'm much happier with these results. And again, this is going to be a base for oils now that it's locked in with the MRP Super Clear Matte. And you could use any, you could use any clear. You could use an acrylic clear, you could use whatever, but I really, I try to stick with lacquers. And the lacquer, I know, is going to just kind of eat into that, and it's going to really set that stuff into the surface and make it really, really durable. But it's important for me to note, because it probably sounds like I'm saying that this stuff is just so fragile. And it kind of is, and it kind of isn't, because what you'll notice as you're working with it is that if you accidentally stick a sweaty thumb into it, you're going to get a thumbprint. No doubt about that, but it's because of the moisture and the oils in your fingers. You'll also notice, like I had a bunch of the acrylic ink collected up in these panel lines, and I needed to restore them to bring back the black outline, because this is where the flaps are. And so I thought, well, let me just see what happens. I'll go ahead and redo the panel lines with Tamiya panel line accent. And then I'll, do the usual thing, remove the excess with a Q-tip that's got a little bit of mineral spirits on it. Because, typically with acrylics, you can do that and it won't affect the acrylic paint at all. Well, not so much with these inks, at least not as thinly as I had them applied, because the mineral spirits would pretty quickly start to just eat through it, and I'd again be back down to the paint. I'd have a flaw. It wasn't working the way I wanted it to. So, but it's important to say that they're not really quite that fragile, because another thing that you can do is you can sand them pretty gradually to create blends and effects before you lock it in. And you can kind of see that right here on the nose. If I can get close enough and in the right light, you can kind of see. Scratch this thing all up. I've been putting way too much work into it. You can kind of see right there maybe where it's a little bit speckled. That's because I sanded it before I locked it in, because I just kind of wanted that effect. All right, I wanted it to also show where the ash from the exhaust, was getting rubbed off of some of these panels from dudes, leaning up against it or whatever. And so I sanded that before I locked it in. So you can do that. And I'm using like 1500 grit Infinity sanding sponges to do that, and it's pretty effective, and it doesn't just come right off. The other thing that you'll notice, this is another trick that I actually did this morning, and I'm really happy with the way this turned out. So what I wanted was to show two effects right here, two little stories. Okay, so right here is, again, dudes rubbing up against the side of the cockpit and rubbing the ash off of the surface. So what I did is I just put a little bit of X20A on a sponge, just very, very little. I wicked most of it out. Actually, no, it wasn't X28, it was 409. Again, going back to this stuff and using it much like I would use mineral spirits with oils. So I put a little bit of it on a sponge, wicked most of it out, and then just kind of started stippling on that to create that sort of, I don't know, you could call it chipping, I suppose, but anyway, just to create that effect where that ash has been removed by people rubbing up against it. Then you've got this thing here where this is the fuel cap, and I want to illustrate how, you know, we got a little bit of some drips, some runs, whatever, when the gas nozzle gets pulled out of there. And so what I did is I put the plane at the right, you know, angle, so to reflect, you know, the true direction of gravity when it's on its wheels. And I put a real small drop of 409 on the gas cap, and then I just started to tease it so that it would flow downward. And I just teased it, not really brushing it, just kind of pushing on it and getting it to flow naturally so that it ran down and collected along that ridge where the sheet metal, where the fillet is right there. And I was so stoked because I could immediately see that it was doing, see how the run has that rime of material on the edges? That's exactly what happens in real life with a fuel spill that runs through dirt or ash. Just perfect. And it immediately set up, and I was able to see that I liked it. And, you know, again, I had worked pretty hard to get this exhaust stain the way that I wanted it. And so I had something to lose, but at the same time, if what I was doing here had turned into a total fail, I could have easily just wiped the entire stain off and started over from the beginning, but felt like it was good. So once I had that on there, I just went and just locally locked all that in with my lacquer flat. So it's now ready for yet a third layer, maybe a fourth layer of oils. So hopefully that covers all of the techniques that I've been doing with that stuff. Okay, so there you go. As usual, a bit of a mouthful. Yeah, when I started to do this, I thought, oh, I'll try and make this a 10 minutes of technique video. Well, that obviously was foolish. That was never going to happen. But I wanted to give you guys as thorough a look as possible, you know, of how this stuff works and how I'm using it, and hopefully equip you to go on and do it yourself. I love this stuff. Again, I know I sound like a cultist, but I'm telling you, if you get a bottle of carbon black, titanium white, and burnt umber of this liquitex stuff, you will be able to do with those three things like 90% of most of the weathering things that are typically going to occur when it comes to dirt and oil and that sort of thing. And I think it provides a wonderful base for additional layers of OPR. So yes, some of the things that I'm doing with it are certainly crossovers with OPR, and you could do pretty much the same thing with oils, but I tend to think of it now as I have an easy way of adding complements to the oil work that I'm going to do after this. So again, just giving you one more quiver, one more arrow for your quiver, one more tool for your weathering toolbox, and hopefully you guys will see the same kind of good results that I've seen, and it'll be equally as compelling. So, all right, as always, I appreciate you guys watching. If you've stuck around this long, as always, much love.